Well, I'll say. So we're starting in Judges chapter 18, and we will be finishing Judges today. And then not today, of course, but next time we will start with the book of Ruth, which most of us know at least part of it, but Ruth is a very short book. There are parts of Ruth that are going to be interesting, but so yeah, we just read, not last week because I was out of town, but the week before we read the story of Samson, which is an interesting story. I posed to Betty Lou, I said, so is Samson a villain or a hero? And he's a judge of Israel, but he's also kind of not. He kind of does some bad things, and he's so he's sort of a mix. He's an interesting mix. He does some good things and some very bad things, and in the end he does a good thing by offering to kill himself to destroy a bunch of the enemy by collapsing a building on them. So it's a short story. We don't hear it in the church very often, but it's very interesting.
What chapter are we on? I'm sorry.
18.
18. Okay.
So I'll tell you, most of the rest of the book of Judges has to do with there's some battle between it's how do I put this? It's the tribes of Israel sort of getting adjusting their accommodations. They fight amongst each other a little bit. They move around a little bit. They I mentioned before that it's interesting when you see the history of the people in the promised land is almost all a history of war. They fight each other, they fight other nations. We'll hear a little bit about that a lot today. So we are on chapter 18, the migration of Dan. Dan is one of the 12 tribes, not just your pastor. In those days, there was no king in Israel. And in those days, the tribe of the Danites was seeking for itself a territory to live in, for until then, no territory among the tribes of Israel had been allotted to them. So the Danites sent 5 valiant men from the whole number of their clan, from Zorah, and by the way, they had land attributed to them, but I don't know what happened. Yeah. So the Danites sent 5 valiant men from the whole number of their clan, from Zorah and from Eshtaol, to spy out the land and explore it. And they said to them, go explore the land. When they came to the hill country of Ephraim, to the house of Micah, they stayed there. While they're at Micah's house, they recognized the voice of the young Levite. So they went over and asked him, who brought you here? What are you doing in this place? What is your business here? He said to them, Micah did such and such for me, and he hired me, and I have become his priest. This is, by the way, the previous chapter. And Levi, the tribe of Levi, was the only one of the 12 tribes that didn't get land because they were the priestly tribe. So they're sort of interspersed amongst all the tribes. Then he said to him, inquire of God that we may know whether this mission we are undertaking will succeed. The priest replied, go in peace. The mission you are on is under the eye of the Lord. The 5 men went on, and when they came to Laish, they observed the people who were there living securely under the manner of the Sidonians, quiet and unsuspecting, lacking nothing on earth and possessing wealth. Furthermore, they were far from the Sidonians and had no dealings with Aram. When they came to their kinsfolk of Zorah and Eshtaol, they said to them, what do you report? They said, come, let us go up against them, for we have seen the land, and it is very good. Will you do nothing? Do not be slow to go, but enter in and possess the land. When you go, you will come to an unsuspecting people. The land is broad, God has indeed given it into your hands, a place where there is no lack of anything on earth. 600 men of the Danite clan, armed with weapons of war, set out from Zerah and Eshtaol, and went up and encamped at Kiriath Jearim in Judah. On this account, that place is called Mahana Dan to this day. It is west of Kiriath Jearim. From there they passed on to the hill country of Ephraim and came to the house of Micah. Then the 5 men who had gone on to spy out the land, that is Laish, said to their comrades, do you know that in these buildings there are an ephod, teraphim, and idol of cast metal? Now therefore consider what you will do. So they turned in that direction and came to the house of the young Levite at the home of Micah and greeted him. While the 600 men of the Danites, armed with their weapons of war, stood by the entrance of the gate, the 5 men who had gone to spy out the land proceeded to enter and take the idol of cast metal, the ephod, and the teraphim. They stole the stuff after they were blessed by the priest. They stole his stuff, his priestly stuff, for no reason, by the way.
But it's an idol. They took an idol.
Well, this is a priest of God. So when they, in this case, idol is not an idol, not a false idol.
Oh, okay.
It's like taking a cross out of the church.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. The priest was standing by the entrance of the gate with 600 men. They took those things. The priest said to him, "What are you doing?" They said, "And keep quiet, put your hand over your mouth and come with us, and be to us a father and a priest. Is it better for you to be a priest to the house of one person or to be a priest to a tribe and clan in Israel?" Then the priest accepted the offer. He took the ephod, the teraphim, and the idol and went along with the people. So the previous chapter, Micah begged that he would be the priest of this area, and they said okay. He said okay, and now he's being kidnapped essentially. So they resumed their journey, putting the little ones, the livestock, and the goods in front of them. When they were some distance from the house from the home of Micah, the men who were in the houses near Micah's house were called out, and they overtook the Danites. They shouted to the Danites, who turned around and said to Micah, "What is the matter that you come with such a company?" He replied, "You take my God that I made and the priest and go away, and what have I left? How then can you ask me what is the matter?" And the Danites said to him, "You had better not let your voice be heard among us, or else hot-tempered fellows will attack you, and you'll lose your life and the lives of your household." And the Danites went their way. When Micah saw that they were too strong for him, he turned and went back to his home. They stole his priest and his stuff, and he complained about it, and they said, "Watch out or people will kill you."
So who are the good guys here?
Who are the good guys? That's a good question. The more you read about the tribes of Israel, the more you go, "Oh, everyone's horrible.
Yeah.
Everyone's horrible." And like I said, back in Joshua, we learned only the tribe of Levi didn't have land. So I'm not totally sure why suddenly the Danites didn't have land.
Yeah.
At some point they did. So I'm not totally sure why. I'm trying to look and see if I can find, and I'm on a map where their land was. Yeah, Dan is an area to the
Get in here and be quiet.
south. So someone took their land from them, I guess. Probably another one of the tribes of Israel took their land from them.
Probably.
So they moved. Yeah, that's part of what's interesting about that is, wait a second, Dan, the tribe of Dan had land. So anyway. And it's interesting that they're all part of the same people, but then they don't mind taking from each other and fighting each other and threatening each other. And yeah. The Danites, having taken what Micah made, and the priests who belonged to him, came to Laish, to a people quiet and unsuspecting, put them to the sword and burned down the city.
They're so nice to each
I
other.
know. There was no deliverer because it was far from Sidon and had no dealing with Aram. It was in the valley that belongs to Beth Rehob. They rebuilt the city and lived in it. They named the city Dan after their ancestor Dan, who was born to Israel. But the name of the city was formerly Laish. Then the Danites set up the idol for themselves. Jonathan, son of Gershom, son of Moses, and his sons were priests of the tribe of the Danites until the time the land went into captivity. So they maintained as their own Micah's idol that he had made, as long as the house of God was at Shiloh. Yeah, they just stole the priest and stole the items from church, and I'm trying to see here. Yeah, so they were on the coast now. Doesn't make any sense. They fight each other all
it
the
doesn't.
time.
Yeah.
Anyway. But it implied to me, there's stuff there's part of the story that's implied, right? That, well, why does the tribe of Dan not have land? Well, they must have fought with someone and lost.
Yeah, yeah,
One of the other tribes.
probably.
So but that's not recorded. Because we do have record of them having land. So they fight amongst themselves. They were supposed to be one united people, and they got divided pretty quick. Okay, it's someone would say, I think this is an over interpretation, but someone would say, well, it's just like denominations. And I said, well,
Hmm.
yes and no. I mean, I think sometimes we fight too much between denominations. We argue too much between denominations. But this isn't a difference in belief, right? They have the same style of worship. They have the same culture for the most part. This is just neighbors squabbling. This is not they just want more. It's about wanting more possessions, more land.
Yes. And it doesn't really sound a whole lot different than today.
Right. Yeah. But I wouldn't say it's like denominations, because denominations are separated because of belief and practice, and their belief and practice is probably very similar. I mean, they're only a few generations into being in the promised land. Well,
Yeah.
maybe 7 or 8 generations, but a couple hundred years, right? So they're fighting just because that's their nature, I think, is the big thing, unfortunately.
Okay.
In those days when there was chapter 19, in those days when there was no king, and we lost Nancy again, but that's okay.
Yeah.
In those days when there was no king in Israel, certainly Levite, residing in the remote parts of the hill country of Ephraim, took to himself a concubine from Bethlehem in Judah. But his concubine became angry with him, and she went away from him to her father's house in Bethlehem in Judah, and was there some 4 months. Then her husband set out after her to speak tenderly to her and bring her back. He had with him his servant and a couple of donkeys. When he reached her father's house, the girl's father saw him and came with joy to meet him. His father-in-law, the girl's father, made him stay, and he remained with him 3 days. So they ate and drank, and he stayed there. This story is interesting already.
Yes.
But she became angry with him, so he came to apologize. What, for the record, what is a concubine? What does that mean? What is a concubine?
A woman who could live with him as a wife, but they're not married.
As usually meant an extra wife.
An extra wife. Okay.
So a second wife. When people talk about biblical marriage, I'm like, well, there's a wide variety of different types of what the definition of marriage is in the Bible. Be careful how you word that. This was acceptable practice, right? To have a sister wife. So that's what a concubine is.
Okay.
It's usually meant a sister wife. Perhaps not officially married, like you said, but so it's interesting anyway. That's not questioned, right? That's not the sinful part of the story.
Yeah.
Right. Hi, Pat. How are you?
Hi, how are y'all doing this morning?
Nice to see you. We are in chapter 19 of Judges.
Oh, good.
We're reading about a concubine of a certain Levite whose name is
Okay.
unnamed. We are on verse 5. On the 4th day, they got up early in the morning, and he prepared to go. But the girl's father said to his son-in-law, "Fortify yourself with a bit of food, and after that you may go." So the 2 men sat and ate and drank together. And the girl's father said to the man, "Why not spend the night and enjoy yourself?" When the man got up to go, his father-in-law kept urging him till he spent the night there again. On the 5th day, he got up early in the morning to leave, and the girl's father said, "Fortify yourself." So they lingered until the day declined, and the 2 of them ate and drank. He was going to be there 1 day, and now he's been there 5 days. When the man with his concubine and his servant got up to leave, his father-in-law, the girl's father, said to him, "Look, the day has worn on until it's almost evening. Spend the night. See, the day is drawn to a close. Spend the night here and enjoy yourself. Tomorrow you can get up early in the morning for your journey and go home." The man managed to keep him for a long time. But the man would not spend the night. He got up and departed and arrived opposite Jebus, that is Jerusalem. He had with him a couple of saddled donkeys, and his concubine was with him. When they were near Jebus, the day was far spent, and the servant said to his master, "Come now, let us turn aside to this city of the Jebusites and spend the night in it." But his master said to him, "We will not turn aside into a city of foreigners who do not belong to the people of Israel, but we will continue on to Gibeah." And they said to his servant, "Come, let us try to reach one of these places and spend the night at Gibeah or at Ramah." So they passed on and went their way, and the sun went down on them near Gibeah, which belongs to Benjamin. They turned aside there to go in and spend the night at Gibeah. He went in and sat down in the open square of the city, but no one took them in to spend the night. I'm gonna stop there just for a second. Did you notice that Jerusalem was a big city before even the Israelites came there? And in this story, they've been there generations, but Jerusalem is still not an Israelite city. Isn't that interesting?
Mhm.
Right? Jerusalem is very specific that it was not. It's the home of the Jebusites. It's not the holy city yet. It will become that, but it isn't yet. Just found that interesting. Then at evening there was an old man coming from his work in the field. The man was from the hill country of Ephraim, and he was residing in Gibeah. The people of the place were Benjaminites. And the old man looked up and saw the wayfarer in the open square of the city. He said, "Where are you going, and where do you come from?" He answered him, "We are passing from Bethlehem in Judah to the remote parts of the hill country of Ephraim, from which I come. I went to Bethlehem in Judah, and I'm going to my home. Nobody has offered to take me in. We, your servants, have straw and fodder for our donkeys, with bread and wine for me and the woman, and the young man along with us. We need nothing more." The old man said, "Peace be to you, I will care for all your wants, only do not spend the night in a square." So he brought him into his house and fed the donkeys. They washed their feet and ate and drank. So there's no such thing as hotels at this time. When we think of Mary and Joseph going to an inn, I think sometimes people think that there's like a hotel. There's no such thing. There are sometimes places that you can pay to stay, or you'll be welcomed in. But there's not what we would think of as like a building with lots of rooms like that. That's not what an inn would be. What probably was an inn for Mary and Joseph was a house that people had set aside to welcome people in because they were expecting a lot of people into the town, and then they have charged a small amount. I thought of a weird side story. I remember when sometimes you go to like football games or and you can park in people's driveways that charge like $5 to park in their driveway because you paid $30 at the stadium.
Yeah.
It reminds me a little, that would be like an inn, right? In a way, like people offering space at their home. So, but among the Israelites, it was common if someone's in the square, he's not sitting there because that's where he stopped. He's sitting there because that's where you would look for someone who would be willing to take you in. And it was commonplace to you would not want someone to be sitting outside, right? But yet the tribes kind of fought. He was a Levite, and no one from the tribe of Benjamin would let him in, but this guy who was living among the tribe of Benjamin, but was also was from Ephraim, said, "Hold on, why are you out here in the square?" When they went to the square, it was like going through the phone book, looking for a place to stay, right? They would go to the square hoping that someone would see them there and take them in, but no one took them in. So the point was to get a place to stay, and this guy from Ephraim ended up taking him in. So it shows that maybe I think part of the implication is the Benjamites and the Levites, there was maybe some conflict, or it's implying that. Because normally, I mentioned earlier, the Levites were the priestly clan. So they were throughout all of the tribes. But for some reason, the tribe of Benjamin wasn't letting him in, even though he's among them. They live in all of the areas. So it's, without saying it, without these these last two chapters, without saying anything specific, we sort of imply that the tribe of Dan probably lost their war in a battle, but they didn't say it. It wasn't told. We have to read between the lines, right?
Yeah.
And the tribe of Benjamin probably has a problem with the tribe of Levi. Again, we have to read between the lines, but it's a little weird that they wouldn't take him in, that someone wouldn't take him in this city.
Yeah. But they're really not asking somebody, they're not going around and knocking on doors. They're just sitting in the. square.
No, but it was commonplace to either sit by the gates of the town
Yeah.
or sit in the town square,
Okay,
and someone would take you in.
okay.
Yeah, you could knock on doors, but there's just like today, if I knocked on 100 doors, I might get someone to give me a glass of water, but
Yeah.
starting with verse 22. While they were enjoying themselves, the men of the city, a perverse lot, surrounded the house and started pounding on the door. They said to the old man, the master of the house, bring out the man who came into your house, that we may have intercourse with him. And the man, the master of the house, went out to them and said to him, no, my brothers, do not act so wickedly. Since this man is my guest, do not do this vile thing. But intercourse does not mean conversation in this case. It means intercourse.
Yeah.
They wanted to rape the man who came into their city. For the record, this is a horrible story.
Yes.
And it gets worse. It gets worse. No, my brothers, do not act so wickedly. Since this man is my guest, do not do this vile thing. Here is my virgin daughter and his concubine.
Jeez.
Let me bring them out now, ravish them, and do whatever you want to them. But against man, do not do such a vile thing.
Oh.
But the men would not listen to him. So the man seized his concubine and put her out to them. They wantonly raped her and abused her all through the night until the morning. And as the dawn began to break, they let her go. As morning appeared, the woman came and fell at the door of the man's house where her master was until it was light. Yeah.
Yeah.
So my Bible has this this kind of note. This story has striking similarities to that of Sodom and Gomorrah. Both stories hinge on a breakdown or misuse of the obligation of hospitality, first of all, and the threat of homosexual rape. So it's definitely a condemnation of the Benjamites, whether it actually happened or not, it's meant to condemn Benjamites, right? Remember, this is scripture, so the tribe of Benjamin still exists after this is written, and it does not make them look good.
No.
In the morning, her master got up, opened the doors of the house, and when he went out to go on his way, there was his concubine lying at the door of the house with her hands on the threshold. Get up, he said to her, we are going, but there was no answer. Then he put her on the donkey, and the man set out for his home. When he entered his house, he took a knife and grasping his concubine, he cut her into 12 pieces, limb by limb. That's right, he did that. And sent her throughout all the territory of Israel. Then he commanded the men whom he sent, saying, thus you shall say to all the Israelites, has such a thing ever happened since the day the Israelites came up from the land of Egypt until this day? Consider it, take counsel, and speak out. Why he cut her up and killed her, I don't get that part. But what he is doing is saying, how can a tribe act so horribly?
How can he act so horribly too?
Right. Remember, she was angry at him. That's why she left him at the beginning of the story. But so he's trying to get the other tribes to rise up against the Benjamites now. You see how this is. Right? Then all the Israelites came out from Dan to Beersheba, including the land of Gilead, and the congregation assembled in one body before the Lord at Mizpah. The chiefs of all the people of all the tribes of Israel presented themselves in the assembly of the people of God, 400,000 foot soldiers bearing arms. Wow.
Yeah.
Now the Benjamites heard that the people of Israel had gone up to Mizpah, and the Israelites said, tell us, how did this criminal act come about? The Levite, the husband of the woman who was murdered, answered, well, she was murdered because, she may have died at the So she didn't answer, but maybe because she was dead, we don't know.
Yeah.
I came to Gibeah that belonged to Benjamin, and I and my concubine to spend the night. The lords of Gibeah rose up against me and surrounded the house at night. They intended to kill me, and they raped my concubine until she died.
Yeah.
I took my concubine and cut her into pieces and sent her throughout the whole extent of Israel's territory, for they have committed a vile outrage in Israel. So now, you Israelites, all of you, give your advice and counsel here. All the people got up as one, saying, we will not any of us go to our tents, nor will any of us return to our houses. But now this is what we will do to Gibeah. We will go up against it by lot. We'll take 10 men of 100 throughout all the tribes of Israel, and 100 of 1,000, and 1,000 of 10,000 to bring provisions for the troops. We're going to repay Gibeah of Benjamin for all the disgrace that they have done in Israel. So all the men of Israel gathered against the city, united as one. The tribes of Israel sent men through all the tribe of Benjamin, saying, what crime is this that has been committed against you? Now then, hand over those scoundrels in Gibeah, so we may put them to death and purge the evil from Israel. But the Benjamites would not listen to their kinsfolk, the Israelites. The Benjamites came together out of the towns of Gibeah to go out to battle against Israelites. On that day, the Benjamites mustered 26,000 armed men from their towns, besides the inhabitants of Gibeah. Of all this force, there were 700 picked men who were left-handed. That's interesting. Everyone could sling a stone at a hair and not miss. And the Israelites, apart from Benjamin, mustered 400,000 armed men, all of them warriors. So 26,000 against 400,000. What's interesting, that thing about the 700 left-handed men who could sling a stone perfectly.
Yeah.
The Israelites proceeded to go up against Bethel where they inquired of God, which of us shall go up first to battle against the Benjamites? And the Lord answered, Judah shall go up first. Then the Israelites got up in the morning and encamped against Gibeah. The Israelites went out to battle against Benjamin, and the Israelites drew up the battle line against them at Gibeah. The Benjamites came out of Gibeah and struck down on that day 22,000 of the Israelites. The Israelites went up and wept before the Lord until the evening. And they inquired of the Lord, shall we again draw near to battle against our kinsfolk, the Benjaminites? And the Lord said, go up against them. The Israelites took courage and again formed the battle line in the same place where they had formed it on the first day. So the Israelites advanced against the Benjamites the second day. Benjamin moved out against them from Gibeah the second day and struck down 18,000 men of the Israelites, all of them armed men. Then all the Israelites, the whole army, went back to Bethel and wept, sitting there before the Lord. They fasted that day until evening. Then they offered burnt offerings and sacrifices of well-being before the Lord. And the Israelites inquired of the Lord, for the ark of the covenant of God was there in those days. And Phinehas, son of Eleazar, son of Aaron, ministered before it those days, saying, shall we go out once more to battle against our kinsfolk the Benjamites, or shall we desist? The Lord answered, go up, for tomorrow I shall give them into your hand. So Israel stationed men in ambush around Gibeah. Then the Israelites went up against the Benjamites on the third day and set themselves in array against Gibeah as before. When the Benjamites went out against the army, they were drawn away from the city. As before, they began to inflict casualties on the troops among the main roads, one of which goes up to Bethel and the other to Gibeah, as well as in the open country, killing about 30 men of Israel. The Benjamites thought, they are being routed before us as previously. But the Israelites said, let us retreat and draw them away from the city toward the roads. The main body of the Israelites drew back its battle line to Baal Tamar, while those Israelites who were in ambush rushed out of their place west of Gibeah. There came against Gibeah 10,000 picked men of all Israel, and the battle was fierce. But the Benjamites did not realize that disaster was close upon them. So instead of being, so many of them were losing, they said, let's try another tactic. Let's make them fight further away from home, and we'll sneak some people and destroy their city behind their lines. That's what they did. The Lord defeated Benjamin before Israel, and the Israelites destroyed 25,100 men of Benjamin that day, all of them armed. Then the Benjamites saw that they were defeated. The Israelites gave ground to Benjamin because they trusted to the troops in ambush that they had stationed against Gibeah. The troops in ambush rushed quickly upon Gibeah. They put the whole city to the sword. Now the agreement between the main body of Israel and the men in ambush was that when they sent up a cloud of smoke out of the city, the main body of Israel should turn in battle. But Benjamin had begun to inflict casualties on the Israelites, killing about 30 of them. So they thought, surely they are defeated before us, as in the first battle. But when a column of smoke began to rise out of the city, the Benjamites looked behind them, and there was the whole city going up in smoke toward the sky. Then the main body of Israel turned, and the Benjamites were dismayed, for they saw the disaster was close upon them. Therefore they turned away from the Israelites in the direction of the wilderness. But the battle overtook them, and those who came out of the city were slaughtering them in between. Cutting down the Benjamites, they pursued them from Nohah and trod them down as far as a place east of Gibeah. 18,000 Benjamites fell, all of them courageous fighters. When they turned and fled toward the wilderness to the rock of Rimmon, 5,000 of them were cut down on the main roads, and they were pursued as far as Gittim, and 2,000 of them were slain. So all who fell that day of Benjamin were 25,000 arms-bearing men, all of them courageous fighters. But 600 turned and fled toward the wilderness to the rock of Rimmon and remained at the rock of Rimmon for 4 months. Meanwhile, the Israelites turned back against the Benjamites and put them to the sword, the city, the people, and the animals, and all that remained. Also the remaining towns they set on fire. It's a lot of people to die.
That's not exactly a bedtime story.
Not a bedtime. None of this is a bedtime story.
No, no.
So by my count, it was about 80,000 people, give or take, died in this war between the tribes. That's a lot.
Yes.
But it's also, you know, the thing that bugs me the most is there's no, who knows which tribe is guilty of this, but there's no talk of, there's no peace talks, there's no reconciliation.
Yeah, yeah.
They are, it's almost kind of genocide. Well, we don't like that tribes, we're gonna make sure they're all killed, every last one of them.
Yeah,
The women, the children, the animals, the towns,
yeah.
everything, but they're the same people. They're all part of the same tribes of Israel. So it's, yeah, it's hard to understand.
Yeah, there's, if you tried to say this is the reason that this is written, I can't figure out what would be the reason.
I mean, it
why
sounds like
it's
the
the Bible.
Benjamites were pretty horrible people.
Yeah,
With the whole wanting to rape the guy and raping
Yeah.
his concubine, but I don't know. Yeah, it's horrible. They're horrible, but then so many of them dying. Basically, their whole land being destroyed and most of their people being killed.
yeah,
I'm not saying that one sin is that any sins are unequal. I mean, they're all sins are equal in God's eyes, but gosh,
yeah,
it's just a, you know, what they call it's a little one-upmanship. Well, if you're gonna do that, we're gonna do something bigger, and then we're gonna do something bigger, and you know, we used to call that a pissing contest. You know, who can get back at the other person for that until you don't know who started it.
yeah,
But it ends up, we've already seen this a little bit, but and we'll see it a little bit more when we get into Samuel, but there's so much fighting among the people, between the people. So one more chapter and we will be done with the book of Judges. I will say one thing about the book of Judges is it is a transition of all the books of the history books, and there's a few more we're going to read. It is the most of a transition between the tribal story and the national story. After this, the nation of Israel is a little bit more united. They haven't had kings. It mentioned a few times in this book, and also back in Joshua, they don't have kings. They have judges. They have some people that are sort of advisors, but they don't really have any central leadership. And they won't until they establish the temple. But they begin to develop that after this. And I think that's part of the problem. They don't see themselves as one people, even though they've been saying the whole time, right? Last chapter. Now the Israelites had sworn at Mizpah, no one of us shall give his daughter in marriage to Benjamin. See, they don't even want to intermarry with them, right? And the people came to Bethel and sat there until evening before God. And they lifted up their voices and wept bitterly. They said, O Lord, the God of Israel, why has it come to pass that today there should be one tribe lacking in Israel? On the next day, people got up early and built an altar there and offered burnt offerings and sacrifices of well-being. Then the Israelites said, which of all the tribes of Israel did not come up to the assembly of the Lord? For a solemn oath had been taken concerning whoever did not come up to the Lord at Mizpah, saying, that one shall be put to death. But the Israelites had compassion for Benjamin their kin and said, one tribe is cut off from Israel this day. What shall we do for wives for those who are left, since we have sworn by the Lord that we will not give them any of our daughters as wives? And they said, isn't there anyone from the tribes of Israel who did not come up from the Lord to Mizpah? It turned out that no one from Jabesh Gilead had come to the camp, to the assembly. When the roll was called among the people, not one of the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead was there. So the congregation sent 12,000 soldiers there and commanded them, go put the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead to the sword, including the women and little ones. This is what you shall do. Every male and every woman that has lain with a male, you shall devote to destruction. And they found among the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead 400 young virgins who had never slept with a man, and brought them to the camp at Shiloh, which is the land of Canaan. Then the whole congregation sent word to the Benjamites who were at the rock of Rimmon and proclaimed peace to them. Benjamin returned at that time and it gave them the women whom they had saved alive of the women of Jabesh Gilead, but they did not suffice for them. So basically they said, well, we don't want any of our people to go, but let's find a city and we'll just get all the virgins there and give them to, we'll kill everybody but the virgins.
Yeah.
And give the virgins to the tribe of Benjamin so they can survive. Even when they're being nice, they're being horrible.
Yeah, horrible. Mhm.
The people had compassion on Benjamin because the Lord had made a breach in the tribes of Israel. So the elders of the congregation said, what shall we do for wives for those who are left, since there are no women left in Benjamin? And they said, there must be heirs for the survivors of Benjamin in order that a tribe may not be blotted out from Israel. Yet we cannot give any of our daughters to them as wives. For the Israelites had sworn, cursed be anyone who gives a wife to Benjamin. So they said, look, the yearly festival of the Lord is taking place at Shiloh, which is north of Bethel on the east of the highway that goes up from Bethel to Shechem and south of Lebanon. And they instructed the Benjamites, saying, go and lie and wait in the vineyards and watch. When the young women of Shiloh come out to dance in the dances, then come out of the vineyards, and each of you carry off a wife for himself from the young women of Shiloh, and go to the land of Benjamin. Then if their fathers or brothers come to complain to us, we will say to them, be generous and allow us to have them, because we did not capture in battle a wife for each man. But neither did you incur guilt by giving your daughters to them. The Benjamites did so. They took wives for each of them from the dancers whom they had abducted. Then they went and returned to their territory and rebuilt the towns and lived in them. So the Israelites departed from there at that time by tribes and families, and they went out from there to their own territories. In those days, there was no king in Israel. All the people did was right in their own eyes. So to summarize, they destroyed a town to give them the virgins from the town. And that they didn't like that. They didn't think that was good enough. So they said to the Benjamites, why don't you go to this people that is not Jewish and just kidnap a bunch of women and take them back for you. And we'll defend you. Because rather than fighting against them to take the women, we didn't fight them, we just kidnapped them. And that's the way the book of Judges ends.
As I said, not a good bedtime story.
This is the history of the people, you know. Yeah. So I would say the people are the it's been generations now, but the at least a couple, 2 or 3, 4 generations, the people are trying to figure out how to live in their land, but they're just never satisfied with what they have.
Yeah.
They're constantly fighting each other over land, well, they have better land, or they have something, they, you know, so, which we do too. So
That's what's going on over in Russia and Ukraine.
yeah, yep, for sure. So I think I said before we started reading the history books, like the history is hard to read because these people that were saved from the land of Egypt and wandered in the desert 40 years, once they finally get land of their own, all they do is fight each other.
Mhm.
Did you notice at the end of that story, it talked about the other Israelites, the other 11 tribes says, well, we don't want tribe of Benjamin to be blotted out. But by the time of Jesus, there's really only 2 tribes left. The rest have been destroyed or absorbed in other nations, or there's 2 tribes left. So I hesitate to say, well, I mean, I think partly it's because of their own actions, their own choices.
Mhm. Mhm.
We have two different tribes here that are almost blotted out from their own poor decisions. So the Levites and the Benjamites. So, and the Danites too, 3 tribes. So yeah, it's just the story of Ruth, which is next, is sort of stuck in the history books. It's kind of like it's like an aside in the theater. The rest of the history books read pretty similarly. Joshua and Judges read very similar from the Samuel books, but Ruth is like a side story, but it's interesting historically where it falls. So we will talk about that more next week. So
Okay, I have a question about the book of Ruth.
yeah,
And if we read it in advance and while we're discussing it next week, ask yourself the question, who's the real heroine in the book of Ruth?
yeah. And
I think we'll find some interesting viewpoints there if we really read it.
I will also tell you, what does it mean to lay at his feet and uncover his feet? It does not mean what you think it means. When it says lie down and uncover his feet and lie down, doesn't that just mean uncover his feet?
Yeah.
Nope. So when I first heard that, I was like, oh, okay. So, yep. So, who's the real hero? And the book of Ruth is an interesting story anyway, but for a lot of reasons. But there's, like I mentioned with the earlier, when we just finished Judges, there are implications in Ruth. You know, the stuff that you have to read within the lines a little bit about who's a foreigner and who's not, and what does it mean to live in someone else's land, and because that's part of what they're fighting about in Judges, right? Is you're not part of us, so you're not welcome here, even if you're another tribe of Israel. And Judges, and we have some of that kind of, you know, foreigner language in Ruth, which is interesting. But I'm going to stop recording.